distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, dear friends, good morning. I welcome you all on behalf of the Civilization Studies Program, the Center for Arts and Humanities, and the Makdisi Program in Literature at AUB. It is a privilege for us to receive 3 lectures today by our guest speakers, Professors Patricia Grieve from Columbia University, and Robert Spitzer and Faryal Razoul from the American University in Cairo. In addition to this, we are also honored by the participation in the roundtable discussions of various colleagues from the Lebanese American University, Notre Dame University Al-Waizi, the University of Beirut, and the American University of Beirut. We are delighted to have them all with us in our forum, State of the Field workshop on liberal arts and general education. And the program has been distributed, I guess, to all of you in terms of hard copies. It is also my delightful duty to extend our warmest thanks and an expression of gratitude to Dr. Dalia Gubara for her dedicated, remarkable efforts in organizing this event from the early stages of conceiving its themes, its structure, and the handling of all the details of its logistics. Thanks are also due to Mr. Peter Shbaya and Dr. Hussein Abdessatir for their contributions as members of the Civilization Studies Organizing Committee for this forum. Special thanks are also due to Ms. Rita Basil from the Center for Arts and Humanities for her thoughtful support with the organizational practicalities all throughout this process. We are also grateful at the Civilization Studies Program for the generous sponsorship that we received from the Center for Arts and Humanities under the directorship of Professor Maher Jarrar, and also to have the privilege of receiving the partnership in organizing this event from the Makdisi Program in Literature. And without further ado, we begin with the first panel, which involves 2 sessions. The first consists of a lecture by Professor Patricia Grieve, followed by questions and comments, and the second session, after a short break, consists of a roundtable around liberal arts and general education in the modern university. Just a note on the side, we were planning to serve coffee in the hall, but I was told that now it is just served outside the auditorium, and given that it is a long session, please feel free to go out and then to get some coffee. But that's in the roundtable session, not during the formal lecture session. I've been entrusted with the role of moderating the first panel, and it is a privilege for me to introduce our eminent guest speaker, Professor Patricia Grieve. Patricia Grieve is the Nancy and Jeffrey Marcus Professor in the Humanities at Columbia University, and she serves as the chairperson of the Global Core Requirement of the Core Curriculum at Columbia College. Her professorship is held at the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures and Comparative Literature and Society. Her research focuses on Christian-Muslim-Jewish relations in the Mediterranean and the transformation through the centuries of Middle Eastern myth and tales into the basis for religious and literary works in Western Europe. And she focuses also on the role that stories and storytelling play in shaping and reflecting cultures, especially in Spain, England, Italy, and France, in medieval and early modern epochs, with a focus on short fiction, romance, historiography. Professor Grieve is a recipient of many awards, including Columbia's Distinguished Service to the Core Curriculum in 2006. Her lecture is entitled Knowledge, Self, and the Globalized World in 21st Century General Education. And there'll be some handouts that will be circulated to accompany her lecture. Please welcome our distinguished guest.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Professor Al-Bisri, for all your efforts in bringing me here. I really appreciate it, and for the very kind introduction. I may end up not using the microphone if people can hear me, since I have my talk here. Congratulations on the 150th anniversary. That's quite an achievement. The campus is beautiful. I arrived late Tuesday, and I spent yesterday morning walking around the city and yesterday afternoon here on campus. And it's really just extraordinary. And the other thing that I was so impressed by was the liveliness of the students. There were students everywhere, some strumming guitars, many having very animated intellectual discussions, and I thought it was just such a rich and vibrant atmosphere. So again, congratulations on the 150th anniversary. I've tried to keep my own remarks to 30 minutes, and every time I practice, you always throw things in, so I'm hoping that I stick to the 30 minutes because I have a student video that's about 10 minutes long. I actually had over 2 hours footage, and I whittled it down to 10 minutes because we can talk about the core curriculum and the value, but I think there's a great deal of value in hearing what some of the students have to say about the experience. So, and much of what I have to say, I think, is going to be very familiar to all of you who have worked in the core curriculum or studied it yourselves as students. So I hope there's something of value in what I have to say, if only reaffirming what you already know. So as Samuel Johnson, the first president of Columbia University, which was originally called King's College, announced in 1754, the mission was to lead the students, and I quote, "from the study of nature to the knowledge of themselves and of the God of nature and their duty to him, themselves, and one another, and everything that can contribute to their true happiness, both here and hereafter." In his 1950 address at the University of Copenhagen, Winston Churchill said, and I quote, "The first duty of a university is to teach wisdom, not to train, and to confirm character and not impart technicalities. We want a lot of engineers, but we do not want a world of engineers. We want some scientists, but we must make sure that science is our servant and not our master," end quote. Churchill recognized, as he said at a slightly earlier address in 1948 in Oslo, Norway, and I quote, "We must all learn to support ourselves, but we must also learn how to live." Today, colleges and universities that have maintained historically or newly adopted core curricula appreciate, as Churchill did, that scientific and technical expertise needs to be balanced by a study of history, philosophy, literature, and the arts, and acknowledge what Johnson recognized centuries ago, the intimate connection between nature and humanity, between the research mission of a university and the individual and shared humanity of those who teach and study in it. Through reference to Columbia College's core curriculum and its aims and goals, especially literature, humanities, contemporary civilization, and global core courses, and a video example of students from my global core course, East-West Frametail collections, I will consider the nature and role of core curricula, arguing for the continuing relevance of Johnson's and Churchill's viewpoints in the 21st century, and indeed for such core courses as an imperative in today's globalized world. First, a few words about my relationship to Columbia's core curriculum. I first chaired Literature Humanities in the 1990s. Everyone who is the chair of a core course sits on the committee on the core. I became the chair of the committee on the core and served as head of it for 8 years. At the same time that I chaired Literature Humanities more recently, I was also the chair of the Committee on Global Core, and I continue to chair that committee as well as be a member of the Committee on the Core. Columbia's alumni are so inspired by the core that Columbia launched about 15 years ago mini core courses for alumni, in which a faculty member typically chooses 3 books and from Lit Hum or Contemporary Civilization and has 3 classes with alumni. I've taught such mini courses, and I just finished one in April with alumni from the graduating class of 1964, plus the one they call the youngster, who was from the class of 1965, and they live in Washington, D.C. And they are so, the alumni are so enchanted by the opportunity to revisit these works, and it's really such a delight to see them so inspired some 50-odd years after graduating. The prototype of Columbia's core curriculum was a war issues course, introduced in 1917 to help students whose country was involved in a world war understand what might be worth fighting and dying for. In 1919, in a moment of profound national despair after the devastation of World War I and the loss of so many promising lives, Columbia formed the course Contemporary Civilization, around the issue of peace that implicitly posed the question, what might be worth living for? By 1937, masterpieces of Western literature and philosophy, known today by its nickname Literature Humanities or Lit-Hum, joined contemporary civilization. In Literature Humanities, we join with our students to explore how the insistent problems of the present can be brought into mutually illuminating contact with the persistent voices of the past through intellectual journeys into significant literary works that range from Homeric epics to Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Columbia added music and art humanities in 1947. Thanks to the pioneering efforts of Professor William Theodore DeBarry, in the late 1940s, Columbia introduced students, and by example, universities in the US, to a series of courses on Asian humanities and civilizations. The Major Cultures requirement joined the core in 1990, and Frontiers of Science was added in 2004. Major Cultures then became Global Core in 2008. In this talk, I will do 4 things: provide an overview of the core at Columbia and what we expect students to experience, and share thoughts on some of the challenges we currently face in continuing to mount such an extensive core curriculum. 2, describe one course in depth, Lit-Hum, in order to understand its continuing relevance to students today, and to explain how we staff the course and what pedagogical resources are available to teachers. 3, describe the global core requirement. While some challenges are perhaps unique to Columbia, others represent issues and concerns that we share with other US institutions and with our colleagues abroad. And finally, I'll share a video of some students in discussion about what they believe they've gained from the core curriculum. And the next one. So this lovely quotation, though we see the same world, we see it through different eyes. Any help we can give you must be different from that you can give yourselves, and perhaps the value of that help may lie in the fact of that difference. So, of course, Virginia Woolf was talking about gender and class issues in Britain when she wrote this, but I think it's relevant today in our very complex and globalized world, and it happens to be a quotation that I love. I can't see the paper, unfortunately. Thank you. Thanks. So, the core curriculum. The Columbia College website contains the mission statement of the core curriculum, which is, the core curriculum is the cornerstone of a Columbia education. Central to the intellectual mission of the core is the goal of providing all Columbia students, regardless of their major or concentration, with wide-ranging perspectives on significant ideas and achievements in literature, philosophy, history, music, art, and science. Though celebrated for their content, these courses are equally important for their small class format. Taught in seminars limited to approximately 22 students, these courses ensure that education at Columbia begins with an emphasis on active engagement, intellectual engagement. The small size of most core curriculum classes provides students with the opportunity to develop intellectual relationships with faculty early on in their college career, and to participate with them in a shared process of intellectual inquiry. In the core curriculum, the pursuit of better questions is every bit as important as the pursuit of better answers. The skills and habits honed by the core, observation, analysis, argument, imaginative comparison, respect for ideas, nuances, and differences, provide a rigorous preparation for life as an intelligent citizen in today's complex and changing world. So the core curriculum focuses on doing, on experiencing, on acquiring skills, not just for school, but for life, as much as, if not more than, it teaches a specific content. The common courses do, for the most part, treat works of the West because that became Columbia's signature in 1919, and it provides for a coherent and integrated curriculum. But it is not a history of the West. Rather, the core curriculum engages students directly with literary, historical, philosophical texts with big ideas about human beings and the world we live in that can be universalized, and ultimately, it provides skills in reading, thinking, debating, civilized conversation, seeing, hearing, writing, and doing. From the beginning, it was an ideas course, not a content course. And also in the early days when so many of the students came from private schools with a very vibrant preparation, and some students came from public schools at that time with less preparation, this course was seen as leveling the playing field for all the students attending Columbia. So this is a bit baffling, but it gives you a sense of the student timeline. Literature Humanities is a year-long course, and it's taken by all freshmen, all first-year students. Also in the first year, the students take 1 semester of Frontiers of Science, 1 semester of University Writing, and then the sophomore year is the year-long Contemporary Civilization, which was actually the original course in 1919. Art Humanities, Music Humanities is 1 semester each, and they can take it any time they want, although we encourage them to finish by the end of the sophomore year. Global Core is 2 semesters and no firm time. The rest of the science requirement is 2 more semesters after Frontiers of Science, again, no firm time. And the foreign language requirement, the students may place out, or they may need to take 1 to 4 semesters depending on the placement test. And then there's a physical education requirement, which is swimming. And the great philosopher Mortimer Adler, who graduated from Columbia, actually didn't receive a Columbia College degree, so he didn't really graduate because he didn't pass the swimming test. But in the late 1980s, I think, they awarded him the degree, finally, after the 1930s. So all Columbia students must take the following courses: CC and Lit Hum, and then they take the 1 semester courses. We're rightly proud of the core at Columbia, but we also face practical realities and problems. For example, some faculty members believe we simply have too many requirements. At Columbia, we've tended to solve the problem of how to address gaps in the core or undergraduate education by accretion. Instead of reworking required courses, we simply add more requirements to the total. It's fair to say that everyone now recognizes that we cannot possibly add any more courses to the overall core requirements. In terms of staffing the courses, especially the interdepartmental courses such as Lit Hum and CC, we regularly face certain problems. Columbia routinely hires new faculty at the tenured and untenured levels, and we need to work to attract new faculty to the core. The hyper-specialization of faculty research contributes to the resistance to the teaching of general education courses for both newer faculty and for many who've been at Columbia a long time but have not participated in the core. Moreover, and more importantly, however willing some faculty may be to teach in the core, academic departments often feel that their own programs cannot afford to lose more faculty to the core curriculum. So there can be an understandable tension between the staffing of general education courses and the need to provide proper coverage of individual academic disciplines. We have been able to provide some incentives for faculty and advanced graduate students who teach in the core, and I'd be glad to answer any of those questions at the end if you're interested in what we've been doing. However, the most tangible reward continues to be the simple fact that faculty find such courses fulfilling teaching and learning experiences once we get them in there, and that they the courses feed back into their own research in surprising ways. Literature Humanities, the 2-semester seminar required of all first-year Columbia College students, begins with Homer and ends with Virginia Woolf. Actually, this year it ends with Toni Morrison. Lit Hum teaches skills that help students in the rest of their studies and in life. They learn how to challenge assumptions, change their minds, and to persuade others by formulating oral arguments based on specific references to the texts. They learn to think and write critically and analytically. The Lit Hum syllabus contains works of art of incomparable beauty, and they are both timeless and timely, works of tremendous humanity. They cause us to ask questions about our shared humanity. Who am I and what is my place in the world? And who are we and how can we best live together? Lit Hum demonstrates a profound respect for students. Unlike other courses in which the focus may be on what scholars have said about the works, nothing stands between the student and the book. We want to know what the students think about what is in the text, and the teachers and students are engaged in each seminar in a shared enterprise. We want them to be lifelong readers and never to feel that there is a book that they cannot begin to tackle with the skills they have learned. How we teach Lit Hum allows us to see in ways that I have rarely experienced in specialized courses in my discipline, the growth of students over time. And typically, they themselves can measure their growth. That makes it very special. We staff LitHum with faculty who come from many different departments and with graduate students who apply to teach in the core. Graduate students must have teaching experience in their home departments before applying to LitHum or CC. We select the graduate student teachers after an application process that includes an interview, recommendations from faculty members about the graduate student's research and teaching abilities, and an examination of the teaching evaluations that undergraduates have submitted. Each week, the chair of LitHum conducts a seminar which is required of all graduate students who are teaching the course for the first time. Faculty who are new to the program are also invited but not obligated to attend. In addition to the seminar, there is a weekly staff meeting, a luncheon to which all instructors are invited. An expert on each of the texts offers a brief lecture of pedagogical strategies for teaching the work in the undergraduate classroom. The Columbia Core Curriculum website also provides pedagogical resources for instructors, including links to outside websites and a collection of materials, slide presentations, study questions, exams, quizzes, and historical information from past instructors. Every 2 years, the instructors of the course review the syllabus for potential changes and to evaluate whether each text continues to serve the course well. A subcommittee of instructors proposes a number of changes, and there is a meeting to discuss the recommendations. Sometimes the meetings are quite lively. I made the mistake of suggesting that we remove Don Quixote and put in Cervantes' exemplary tales because it was more manageable, and they practically threw tomatoes at me. And finally, one faculty member who is now retired just put up his fists and said, "We want the Don." So when I say discuss, you know, they're quite lively meetings. After that, all instructors are invited to vote on the proposed changes, and the majority opinion determines the syllabus for the next 2 years. The course has changed over time and has responded to issues raised by faculty and students. For example, there were no women on the syllabus until 1985, when the instructors added Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Austen is, of course, a most worthy author in her own right, but the timing coincided with the admission of women to the college in 1983, and Columbia did not believe the message should be sent that no woman had ever written anything worthy of the core that all Columbia students experienced. Today, we may talk about diversity in the core, and when we do, we mean a number of different things. I think it's important to recognize that diversity does not simply mean the content of the syllabus. My colleagues who've taught CC and LitHum would agree that every class of LitHum and CC is different because all the people in each section are individuals, and this creates unique classroom dynamics and environments. Is it possible to bring diverse, even global perspectives to the core without changing the syllabus? I think many of us do this already by the way we teach, what our backgrounds are, our intellectual backgrounds, and by who we are. Years ago, I would not have been teaching at Columbia College, which had an exclusively male faculty until the second half of the 20th century. At the time I went to college, I certainly could not have been a student at Columbia College, which was a men's school until 1983. Columbia today welcomes students from around the country and around the world, and we continue to have the socioeconomic diversity that has always been its hallmark. The very diversity of the faculty and of the student body de facto means that multicultural perspectives enter the classroom, and that should not be underestimated as a factor in maintaining a vigorous core course. Another kind of diversity is not just who we are, but how we teach, how we conduct literary criticism, what kinds of works we study on our own, whose voices we now look for. All of that creates an evolution of experience in the classroom. Let me give 2 very brief examples. Boccaccio appears to offer a radical shift in literary form and perspective. However, in order to teach the Decameron, one need not present Boccaccio as the inventor of the novella in Western Europe, but as the inheritor of a significant history of oral storytelling that derived from ancient Persian, Indian, and Egyptian traditions, and which arrived in Western Europe through both oral and written cultural transmission. So I usually include something from the 1001 Nights before we do the Decameron. In studying Don Quixote, while we still discuss metafiction in the novel, the nature of madness, and the idealism of the Don himself, we are just as likely to notice that Cervantes also asks, how do you coexist in a multicultural society in which there is so much inequality and intolerance of difference? We are likely to notice in Don Quixote that Cervantes gives voice to women in a way that had not been seen before in prose fiction. Next slide. Thank you. So, Global Core. The DeBarry Report of 1988 convinced Columbia of the importance of ensuring student exposure to world cultures beyond Western Europe, and the college introduced the major cultures requirement in 1990. In 2008, after considerable discussion in the then Committee on Major Cultures and discussion with faculty, the requirement became the Global Core requirement. Currently, Columbia students must take 2 courses to fulfill the Global Core requirement, drawing from a list of approved courses, many of which have been created specifically to meet the criteria for Global Core classes. Why did we change the requirement, and what is it like now? Timothy Cross's book about the Columbia Core, Oasis of Order, which is available on the website in its entirety, discusses the decades of debate and evolving syllabi of contemporary civilization and literature humanities, and how the faculty and students constantly look to the state of the world in order to determine the pressing issues of their time as they formulated and refined the courses. And the Committee on Major Cultures asked itself, as our core predecessors did, if we were meeting the challenges today of providing what our students need to go out into the globalized world of the 21st century. And we decided that the major cultures requirement did not. Students and faculty felt that that list of approved courses for major cultures did not have any kind of coherence of structure and goal in the way that the other courses did. What principles, we asked ourselves, could we harness from the core courses CC and Lit Hum, while recognizing that it would be impossible to create a single course about the world that our faculty would all agree is what all students should study. Recognizing that the new Global Core requirement would still represent a list of courses from which students would draw to, we nevertheless determined to find a way to create some kind of parity between the Global Core and the other core courses, especially Lit Hum and Contemporary Civilization. So, the Global Core requirements ask students to engage directly with the variety of civilizations and the diversity of traditions that, along with the West, have formed the world and continue to interact in it today. Courses in the Global Core typically explore the cultures of Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East in a historical context. These courses are organized around a set of primary materials produced in these traditions and may draw from texts or other forms of media, as well as from oral sources or performance broadly defined. And the next slide, please. So we have courses that focus on civilizations and cultures, but then we also created an opportunity for courses to be formed around a common theme or a set of analytic questions or interactions between different world regions. And most of the new courses that have been created are actually a kind of mixture of these two, rather than separate courses. So, first of all the core courses are based on primary materials, and that hadn't been the case with major cultures. Literature, philosophy, history, political treatises, artworks, music, materials that give us the voices from the places from which they are emanating. They are seminar classes capped at 22 to 25, 22 for Lit Hum CC, 25 for Art and Music Humanities. Global core courses are meant to be seminars, but we do have some lecture courses with discussion sections that are taught by faculty and graduate students. But our aim is to create as many seminars as possible. They are discussion-based seminars, core courses. They are comparative and interdisciplinary. They are geographically and temporally expansive. That much we could harness for the new Global Core. The major cultures requirement consisted of courses on Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Native American cultures. There was a rigid wall between those regions and the parts of Europe covered by the other core courses, and the US was rarely included in a major cultures course. We did two things. We tore down that artificial wall and opened the requirement up to ideas that traverse the globe. We also expanded the definition of primary materials so that we could invite departments and faculty who had been shut out of the conversation, invite them into it. For example, to encourage political scientists, we suggest that political speeches, newspapers, trial documents, and contextualized data could all be used to fulfill the requirement to include primary materials. And now we're going to just do a series of slides. So the world is interconnected, and that interconnectedness has a history. And the reason we were focusing on this is that we didn't want the courses to be all courses about the last 25 years or so and today, but rather courses that were of the ancient world and the medieval world could also be included in the ways in which they have problems that are present today and also were global in their time. So this is a course, Andalusian Symbiosis, Islam in the West, that I co-teach with a professor for Middle Eastern Studies, Muhsin al-Muswi. And anyone who's team taught will realize, I think, that it's the most terrifying thing to do, to show your vulnerabilities to a colleague. But we felt, one of the reasons that we encourage team teaching is that it causes faculty stretch. So we ask for faculty stretch in the global core courses in two ways. One, in which you're pushing yourself beyond the boundaries of what you normally teach, which is what we do in Lit Hum and CC. Nobody sees himself or herself as an expert in Homer to Virginia Woolf. So we wanted that for global core too. And the second way, aside from pushing the boundaries, the intellectual boundaries, is to terrify yourself by having a colleague in the room with you and learning from each other and learning from the students as well. Oh, I'm sorry, could you go back to that other slide? So interdisciplinary seminar, comparative context, voices heard means two things. Just as in Lit Hum and CC, we have to hear the voices of the students. It's not a teacher-imparted course, a teacher knowledge-imparted course. And voices heard also refers to the fact that it has to be the voices emanating from the particular areas that we're studying. We didn't want a course of Western academics opining on other parts of the world. And then outcomes, the others that we talked about, critical thinking, writing, etc. But also we encourage students to think about the global core courses in relation to the rest of their core experience. And so that thinking through process is going to be different for every student depending on what they've taken. Professor DeBarry, who is now 95 and is still teaching, which is just remarkable, created a course with about 60 faculty over the course of 5 summers called Nobility and Civility. And it was the first one to take core works from Lit Hum and CC and put them in conversation with significant works from East Asia for the most part. Science Across Cultures, Professor Saliba, who's unfortunately retiring, is a study of Islamic contributions to science, but also, as I explained down here, that although science may not have always developed in a linear fashion, the problems science was called upon to solve exhibited a continuity that crossed cultural, linguistic, and religious borders. It's been a very, very popular course, and we don't know if we'll be able to get someone else to teach it, but it would be a great loss if we can't continue it. And another course that was created for Global Core touches on South America, on China, on Europe, United States as well, and he focuses on ruins and monuments in something that is universal, transnational memory, politics, and the culture of human rights. And so we've also added human rights courses to the Global Core. So I'll be silent for a second so you can look at the slide. So we wanted to create new courses for the Global Core. Next slide. And as I mentioned before, since core courses are shared learning experiences, we wanted to increase the possibility for faculty to be learning and not simply teaching the materials that they already know extremely well in their own discipline. So we try to push faculty as well as pushing the students, which we always do. So we were able to get a grant, a contribution from an alumnus of the college and his wife, who was an alumna of the business school. He's from the United States, she's from China, and they gave us $250,000 for 5 summers to have faculty workshops to develop new courses. And we probably had about 25 courses come out of the 5 years, which ended last year. And we're in the process of getting another $250,000 to keep going with the summer seminars, but we won't have one this coming summer, but we hope next summer. Again, I'm going to be quiet so you can see what's on the slide. Okay, next slide, please. So, as I said, we have workshops, and so we provide training. We've also developed specialized TA-ships, teaching assistantships, in order to provide multiple sections of some of the courses. And so that's similar to LitHum and CC as well. So we have one which is primary text of Latin American civilization, and we have one called African Civilizations, which is taught by both faculty and graduate students. Okay. So the value of the core curriculum within the broader liberal arts education. Core and liberal arts in general train students not for a specific job, but for life, for the world out there now and in the future, preparing them for jobs not yet imagined. And so the summary of where we've been in this talk. The core is about doing, not about passive learning. It challenges students to challenge their own ideas and assumptions. It encourages the development of the individual, the identity, as I mentioned before, who am I and what is my place in the world, who are we and how can we best live together, and it increases individual skills. From what point am I starting in terms of the skills to be developed, and how can I measure my growth during the courses, speaking as a student. The core respects students as thinkers and hard workers. Students engage directly with primary materials, no filter of secondary criticism between the students and these great works. It develops critical and analytical skills in reading, writing, discussing, and problem solving, which cultivate flexibility and agility of mind, and the ability to make meaningful connections, which are life skills. It builds community. In these discussion-based courses, the dynamic is student to student, not teacher imparting information to student. Each class creates its own community of learning. It fosters bonding among students. Given that all students are taking LitHum and CC at the same time, students engage not just with their own section, but with others in residence halls, dining halls, on the steps of Low Library, etc. This allows for the sharing of multiple perspectives and the revisiting of material outside the classroom. Students share a bond with alumni as they're taking the course, and when students themselves become alumni, they create bonds that last a lifetime. The core allows students to appreciate and not fear complexity, to understand relationships between things that might not appear similar. It requires students to look backwards and forwards, to be able to see the construction of the works, to understand not just what is in the works, but how and why. The core builds on the diversity of our student body to bring multiple and distinct viewpoints into the classroom, which helps prepare them for the world beyond college. The early core courses build a foundation for the rest of the core and for a student's major. This kind of education stretches your mind in a way that develops your capacity to learn new things, and as I mentioned before, to make meaningful connections that encourage you to rethink, reassess, redo, and change yourself, skills that you will carry with you for life. So I have a video. We're going to keep going. I'm going to go over there. We're skipping the LitHum. Oh, let's go back to that one, the frame tails. It should be the next slide. Yes. This. So what I did this last spring. I was on sabbatical this year, so I didn't teach any courses. I videoed over 2 hours of my students, a LitHum class and a global core class on frame tale narratives. And I asked them if they'd be willing to come in. It was during the final exam period. If they'd be willing to come in and be filmed talking about some passages from works we had studied and also to talk about the core. So I'm skipping the discussion of the passages, the LitHum discussion of the passages, and also I didn't even put in the global core discussion of the passages because it was just too much material. But I was so pleased that 8 of them from each of the classes would give up time during final exams to come in and be filmed, because I asked them to help me put together a talk so that people would hear not just from me how great this is, but hear how it has affected them. So the first student that you'll hear is actually an engineering student. And engineering students choose what they're going to take of the core. They don't take the entire core. So that's what he's talking about when he says he decided to take global core, which I happen to think is a mistake, but that's another issue. And then there's a the next student, Carly, is very, very smart, but she was nervous, and she says, you know a lot in the first one, but when you get to the second conversation she's having, she's calmer. And then one of the students, Christopher, with the blondish hair, says something, it's almost indistinguishable, and the class laughs. And it's because what he has said is that the core curriculum serves as a frame for the rest of the education, and since this was the frame tale narratives course, and I kept insisting over and over that stories are never neutral and that frames and framing devices are everywhere, they thought this was very funny that he said the core curriculum was the frame for the education. So let's go to the next one. And I need to skip through a few things, so I'm going to come over there. Yes.
As an engineering major, I sort of had an option about either getting LitHum, CC, or taking 2 global cores. I decided to take the global core route just because I was familiar with a lot of the content in LitHum and contemporary civilization. And I wanted to expand my awareness of critical texts of different countries. So I think my selection of global core classes was pretty important in regard.
I should have said it's 10 minutes, so that you're not wondering when it's ever going to stop. I'm going to fast forward through a few things. It's 10 minutes.
Just to take experience with the core in general, and what I got, just because it was limited pretty much to those 2 courses.
What was your course?
East Asian Buddhism.
I sort of looked back on my experience with the core, my 2 favorite courses from that, the very beginning was LitHum and then CC. And what I liked about both of those was both that you had to engage with so many texts, such across such broad historical time frame. And that content, you sort of learn how to form patterns in mind and how to recognize them across texts, across genres, across all these things. So what I did then in choosing my global course is taking that idea of like text and pattern finding and then trying to fit it somewhat within my area of specialization, which is medieval literature. So sort of taking things within my own time period, but then expanding not across time, but East-West, so here with East-West framework narratives. And then my previous semester doing major texts of Middle East and East India, things like this. So.
Cool. Thank you, Anna.
I've taken a lot of literature classes here, so, I was comfortable stepping into this course. But what I found to be most rewarding about the core curriculum and the way that the 2 foundational courses, LitHum and contemporary civilization, interact with the rest of the courses is, while, ostensibly they're a literature course and a philosophy course, they're not, you're not learning how to do literary analysis. You're not learning, about the deep roots of philosophy. We're discussing these texts as they relate to people, to our lives. I think that kind of, and And those two foundational courses have informed not only, my work in this course, but also all of the other courses that I've taken here. Like they're having a command of those texts, a familiarity with them, makes a lot of other courses much more rewarding because you understand a lot of the scholarly basis that the things that you're studying have come out of. But I think the last question that you presented us with, should a core curriculum focus on the development of moral character is really relevant to my experience with the core, because I feel like in all of these classes there's discussion of morality and what's right and what's wrong and how, but I feel like the important thing for me is that it hasn't been prescriptive. It hasn't been, the core is not about telling you what's right and wrong, it's giving you the tools to discuss it. It's showing you how people throughout time, throughout Western history have conceived of right and wrong, and it's kind of left up to you and your peers to discuss it and to decide what you think about it, which has been a fantastic experience for me. I think that I've definitely changed a lot and learned a lot about how I feel about things through my discussions, not only in class but outside of class with all the students here who have taken the same courses.
Thank you. I definitely agree with Carly about sort of the core not being a prescriptive judgment on morality, and I think that's like for me too, that's been really important. I think something that when I wrote that question I hadn't even really thought about like whether or not classes are judged to be prescriptive, because I just don't think that, like, if you look at the history of like Western culture, Eastern culture, just like cultures in general, morality is a very fluid thing. It's not black and white. It's never been black and white, and that's why it's so interesting to sort of think about and talk about, because even in some of the stories that we're talking about today or that we've read in class, you can understand why certain characters would act the way that they do, even if you don't agree with them, and there's sort of like that nuance in different texts that we've read and that you can apply to sort of your everyday life, where in a lot of situations there's never just like one right answer, and just to be able to think through like what the implications of decisions are is, I think, to me, like more important than like the question of like what is the right decision, which just feels sort of very productive.
Anyone else? I was interested about that development.
It was limited pretty much to those two courses.
What was your other course?
History of Buddhism.
I sort of looked back on my experience with the core. My two favorite courses from that were the very beginning ones, Lebanon and then CC. And what I liked about both of those was that you had to engage with so many texts, such a process broad, historical time frame. And that from that you sort of learn how to form patterns in your mind and how to recognize them across time.
Or taking two further course, I decided to take the core route because I was familiar with a lot of the content and what common
Texts, such a process broad, historical time.
Ostensibly they're a literature course and a philosophy course. They're not, you're not learning how to do literary analysis. You're not learning, about like the deep roots of philosophy. We're discussing these texts as they relate to people, to our lives. I think that kind of
The text necessarily should not be chosen that way. This is how you should be as a person, rather like encourage you to think about that. And I think that points to question number 6, which is the purpose of the core curriculum. And for me, it's sort of always been the idea that, once you fulfill the basic necessities of life, once you have like food, shelter, water, whatever, what do you do then? How do you fill your leisure time? How do you live? What is it that you do to make life meaningful? And sort of that, I think, is the function of the core, and that it sets out, here are how people have dealt with these beliefs. Here are how people have come with ideas, and ideas are the thing that you can latch onto, whether it's in like a philosophical sense or like a religious sense. Those are like the transcendent things that sort of make all the basic necessities meaningful and necessary. Thank you.
I think on that note, the core for me at least has given provided me with a way of thinking and approaching different ideas that I haven't been exposed to before. And honestly, whether or not I remember a specific detail from a specific work, it seems less important to me than the fact that I have a greater understanding for how to talk about something that I'm familiar with. And there's less fear of engaging with different topics because because you've done it before with the core, that you will eventually understand it, or you'll have some enlightened appreciation for it that you had before. Thank you. So, yes, Mr.
I would like to say that it does seem like the core functions as a framework effect for curriculum. That's how I feel, yeah. It connects all the everything else. At times, it makes my education a little blurry. Like sometimes I'm not sure where I read or where I can get class. That's a good thing, I think, though. It really unifies my experience here.
Yes, no, I think you're right. So sorry, one last thing to add. I think that just the core is never true. That's been really valuable.
After you've taken the course, what's important is that you're sort of exercising this muscle in a way, and you're sort of developing this audacity to disagree with certain people, or just to formulate your opinions and your beliefs, in a succinct way, back up what you believe, which I think is something we all use, that we all need. So I mean, just the act of doing that, I think is one of the most important things of all.
This isn't so well already, but I just want to add that something that I'm thinking from the course that every single idea that I had, whether it be about religion, social beliefs, or I don't know, just about anything, is rigorously questioned, scrutinized, and pushed to ask why, and it's always going to be text that the professor asks, okay, why now? And then there were times, especially in presentations, that I just go out just so confused and sometimes very upset. But it's good for me, it would happen almost. So I have 2 days a week where I have that meeting, and it's what he said. I'm exercising this part of my brain that I've actually never did in high school. Well, I have, but I'm not this much. And so in a way, it's I learned that I learned to ask more question, and not just about what I read, but about my life as well, what I believe in. And then I finally came to the conclusion that there is no black and white. And for me, that really is, it might seem simple, but just one of the most powerful things that I've ever learned. That everything is gray. That what was right used to be wrong. What is right now will be wrong sometime in the future, or something like that. And that's just extremely powerful for me. And I think that's completely changed the way I think and how I think about my life and what I want to do.
Thank you.
One thing that I think the core has really done for me, especially the Humanities, as well as courses like this, where it's not a lecture, it's a discussion where you're not sitting taking notes on something that a professor is telling you, which I've gotten a lot out of courses like that. But on the other hand, I think that being given the opportunity to engage directly with other students and to discuss the ideas with each other and not just with the professor has, for me, fostered being comfortable with discussing ideas with other people, which I don't think is something that I necessarily was comfortable doing before. And I think that it's an incredibly valuable thing to be able to do, to engage with other people. Not just on a superficial social level, but really deeply questioning, ideas and philosophy and literature. It's fantastic, and I'm so glad that I have this opportunity.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. So to wrap up very quickly, then. The core curriculum insists that its students challenge the ideas of some of the greatest thinkers the world has known and to be unafraid to challenge their own ideas. The cultivated imagination, which is the legacy of the core curriculum, is the seedbed of invention, creativity, and progress. Studies show that today's college students, college graduates, will likely change careers 5 times or more, not change jobs, but change careers. The core curriculum provides students with an agility of mind and a set of intellectual and critical skills that enable them to respond to challenges and risk exploring new opportunities. Columbia liberal arts graduates find success and jobs, and statistics prove that. We believe in the power of significant books to broaden our students' perspectives and skills and enable them to think for themselves. In order to train them in this way, we need to hear what they think about the books we read with them. The challenges for general education to allow for intensive student engagement with intellectually rich materials, the cost of having smaller classes, attracting faculty to these courses are many. But as those of us who have been fortunate enough to participate in general education and core text programs know, the rewards to our students are immeasurable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. There's lots of elements that are great value for us at AUB and in terms of the regional and local universities. We have about 15 minutes now for a few questions and comments, and I hope that this will also take us to further reflections in the context of the roundtable.
One quick question. Can you just please explain the relation between Columbia College and Columbia University? I'm not sure where the application is. Is it in the college or is it in the university? The second thing is much more general, and that is that you seem to have control over the core curriculum, and as such, the relation to what goes on in A to B is less, to my mind, to do with CS as to do with general education. And so a point for discussion is really, I think, throughout this seminar, is about the relation between general education and the CS program. Because, I mean, we have absolutely no control. There's nobody from CS on the General Education Committee. Yeah. So the General Education Committee has decided that people do need to do social sciences and so on, but we have no say in that at all.
Yes. So the first question about Columbia College. So actually, if you skip to the next, those were the students in the videographer, and then the core curriculum is the centerpiece of the undergraduate education in Columbia College, which is one of the schools of Columbia University, and the full name of Columbia University is Columbia University in the City of New York, and then in world. So there are 4 undergraduate divisions in the broad Columbia community. There's Barnard College, which is the women's college, and they have their own curriculum, although they can take classes in Columbia College, but they don't take our core curriculum, unless they're in a global core course, which any of the undergraduates can take. Barnard College has its own set of courses called 9 Ways of Knowing, and its distribution requirements, so it's general education, but from a series of classes from which they can choose. There's the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, which is an undergraduate and a graduate school, and the undergraduates live in the dorms with Columbia College students. They are part of the college experience, but they take a reduced core curriculum. And then there's the School of General Education, School of General Studies, which is for what we call the non-traditional student. often students who took a year of college and then dropped out, or who never went to college and have raised families and are now going to college. General Studies does have the core curriculum, but they staff their own sections. The General Studies students are not in the classes with the Columbia College students. Because it has been affirmed, confirmed, and reconfirmed that the core curriculum is the center of the Columbia College education, it really it has pride of place, and we do have control. But that doesn't mean, as I mentioned, that there aren't still tensions. Because when we look at our peer institutions that don't have such a core curriculum, our department sizes are comparable. So if I teach Lit Hum for the year, and we teach 4 courses a year, that means that only 2 courses are in my department. So it's an incredibly expensive curriculum to mount. And then when you look at my department and you look at the department at Yale, we have the same number of faculty. So we always have this tension.
Hi, I was wondering, the global core courses sound, this whole program, or this additional program to the older core courses, sounds really very good. I like this idea of faculty stretch, and I like the idea of courses being organized around phenomena like the frame tail that can go anywhere in terms of, spatially, temporally, and to have texts that go across disciplines, having social scientific texts, archaeological, historical. It sounds really good, but what it made me think of is why not have only global core courses and get rid of the Lit Hum, contemporary civilizations, or alternatively, have those be global core courses, like reconstruct them so that so that you completely actually get rid of this West and the rest divide, or this idea of great texts, which in a way, in my mind, shuts down discussion. When you give students text and say that they're immortally beautiful or great or timeless, then they know that they're supposed to respect them and like them and treat them, it's a funny way of, and then who gets to get into that list of texts? We have Western texts, and then maybe we replace them. It reminds me of the curriculum debates, the canon debates from the 80s and 90s. So I was wondering, just the question, why not make it all global core courses? That's my question.
Well, it's been suggested, and people suggest it over time, and the resistance is tremendous. But let me just say something about great works. I mean, we do think the works are significant, and that's why they deserve to be on the list. But we don't ask the students to venerate the texts, and I think. What you heard from the students, the one who said that we're always pushed to ask why, shows that they're not simply sitting around congratulating the dead author of the text for having such a beautiful or timeless work. When they see how the ancients dealt with traumas in Thucydides, it really doesn't shut down conversation. That may be, I think there's a particular kind of student, we have many different students, but a particular kind of student that comes to Columbia College. They tend to be very vocal, and they tend to want this experience that's going to push them to active engagement with each other. or they could have chosen another school. On the other hand, I'm the faculty representative to the NCAA, which is the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and so each university or college has one person who is the faculty representative to the NCAA. And I can't tell you how many of the student athletes said to me, "You know, Professor Green, I didn't know there was a core curriculum here." That's not to say the student athletes are not intelligent. They're actually some of the best of the students that I've had. But it just shows how focused they were on where they were being recruited for athletics as opposed to focusing on the curriculum. It comes up and it comes up, and it's just the resistance from the faculty, from the administration, from the students themselves, and from the alumni to get rid of Lit Hum and CC. That's what led Professor DeBarry to create Nobility and Civility, because it does include some text from Lit Hum and CC, but I can't, for the foreseeable future, see those signature courses leaving. I tried to emphasize a bit in my own talk that for me the skills acquired matter more than the content. So I actually am a person who could imagine a global core course doing what Lit Hum does in terms of skills acquisition, but that kind of flexibility is not shared across the college. And the core curriculum is the single entity that brings in the most amount of donor dollars, which then benefits the rest of the college. So renovated classrooms are donated in honor of the core curriculum, and all kinds of courses are using those classrooms, not just the core curriculum. I think what you say makes sense, but there is a tradition that is going to hang on to this for certainly. I will be long gone, I think, before any change is made. Our last chair of Lit Hum tried to reduce the number of works. It's something like 10 to 14 works in each term, fall and spring, which is a lot of reading. And she tried to reduce it to, I think, about 7 works in each term, and the resistance was tremendous. I should also say that it benefits departments, because when you have faculty coming from different departments, students sometimes want to take courses in your department because they follow you. And it also can be that a particular, getting to read Dante means they now want to take something in the Italian department. It doesn't necessarily have to follow the particular instructor. So there's a resistance to taking books off the list because of all the departments that are represented in the list. So there's also a practical aspect there.
We'll take one last question.
Sure.
I'm sure that we're going to return to these issues in the context of the so one last question.
I just would like to refer back to an earlier statement in your presentation. You expressed some anxiety about the gaps in the core curriculum, and one of the remedies for the anxiety is to simply keep adding more and more courses in the hope that somehow, if you add enough, the gap's going to be filled. We've just started a new program at the University of Lebanon, which is north of Lebanon, a small program, and this was part of our discussion about gaps, and we, I think, decided that there was no way that we could possibly fill the gaps, and that even to make the assumptions that gave us a vocabulary that talked about gaps was perhaps the wrong way to proceed. So what did you, other than adding courses, and you've got a plethora of courses and a plethora of programs, other than doing that, how did you deal with this whole question of gaps, which is, even though I'm the coordinator of the program and we've rejected this idea of gaps, it still lurks on the edges of my thinking anyway, that there are some important texts that still actually aren't getting into the program.
Yes, well, I think probably two areas that we've talked the most about, and one I discussed in length, and that is moving from the major cultures requirement to global core, and what we were trying to do with creating a skeleton or a structure to global core courses, even though the specific content would be different. So that was one thing. And the other really is science. And I think we're still not happy with the way science is being handled. The students so many students are so afraid of science. And so Frontiers of Science, which took 20 years to create and get faculty approval, took 20 years. Frontiers of Science is a course designed to help students understand scientific habits of mind. And over the course of the years, the students have complained bitterly about it. The science students think it's beneath them, and the non-scientists are still terrified of science. So that's been a problem. But the funny thing is the faculty. Frontiers of Science is always taught by 4 faculty members, and we've had Nobel Prize winners teaching Frontiers of Science. They love the course because the chemists don't necessarily talk to the biologists unless it's biochemistry. And so what they were trying to impart to the scientists, science students, is 2 things. 1, you need to be able to talk across sciences. And 2, the English major you're sitting next to might actually end up being the biggest donor to science down the road. So you need to be able to communicate your scientific interests to a general public. But it's still, so the scientists still don't think that 3 semesters of science is enough. The students aren't necessarily happy with it, and the Frontiers of Science as a course designed to be somewhat like LitHum and CC has not been as successful as we want it to be. So those are 2. I don't know, well, technology, all the advances in technology. And so this isn't restricted to the core curriculum, but we've been trying to include more technology in different kinds of classes. And so a big buzzword now is digital humanities, and we've hired some faculty who are digital humanities experts. But we're always going to be thinking, and I hope, thinking and changing and evolving. And gaps are always going to pop up because of the evolution in society. I hope I'm not too anxious about it, but I think obviously the knowledge that exists in the world is greater than we can bring into a curriculum. And the best we can do is prepare students to face new things head on and not be afraid of them.
Thank you very much. If we could just have a smooth transition from this part of the session to the round table, quickly getting coffee or tea if you like, and we start within 4 minutes.
All right, we're going to start now with the roundtable session. And I'm going to just have a very brief introduction of each of our participating panelists. And I'm starting from my right with Dr. Ali Al-Haj. He's Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering and the Director of the General Education Program at AUB, which oversees the assessment of GE offerings at the university, including humanities and social sciences. And again, Dr. Patricia Grieve is the Nancy and Jeffrey Marcus Professor in the Humanities at Columbia University and serves as the chairperson of the Global Core Requirement of the core curriculum of Columbia College. Then Dr. Khalil Bitar is Professor of Physics and former Dean of Arts and Sciences at AUB. He lectures in the core curriculum of the Civilization Studies program in its Modern Division. Dr. Samir Makdisi is Professor of Economics at AUB, former Deputy President of our university, and director of the Institute for Financial Economics, and a long-standing supporter of liberal arts education at the university. Dr. Helen Sader is professor of archaeology at UB and a principal academic serving the mandate of the humanities at the university, and a long-standing supporter of our CS curriculum. And Dr. Edward Alam is professor of philosophy and theology at Notre Dame University in Loizy. He holds the endowed Benedict XVI chair and held until recently the regional directorship of the Council for Research in Values and Philosophy. Actually, is it better that I talk without the microphone?
Yeah.
It's loud, actually. Without? Yeah. Okay, with the microphone. All right, fine. Actually, I'm going just to throw a few questions, just to animate the discussion, and then perhaps each participant will speak for about 7 minutes, and then we open it, for further comments and discussions with the audience. We've been centering the whole event around liberal arts and general education, and I guess most of us are coming from the perspective of supporting this sort of curriculum in the universities. But evidently this is a model that is dominant in the North American institutions, and it has a sort of long-standing tradition and history in terms of interpreting the way the quadrivium, trivium, and also the integration of, at times, architecture and medicine within the various kinds of subjects that would inform education, whether in times of antiquity, how it's related in the Renaissance, early modern period, and then the later developments in this model. But in the modern context, it's evidently not the only dominant model. We have the Oxbridge model, even though Cambridge might have the natural sciences stripus that it includes, but it is partially directed towards science students. Or we have the Grande École model that turns its back on this core curriculum approach and focuses more on specialism. Or we have the Humboldtian holistic model, which is not necessarily looking favorably at the liberal arts model, even though it inspired it historically. So why liberal arts and general education? That's one of the questions. And second, it was a question that is pressing, which is part of the discussions we had earlier this morning. Is there a distinction between what we might call a core civilization studies program and general education, or even a distinction between how liberal arts are interpreted versus general education offerings? And how could these two sit together in the same institution without strife and potentially conflict arising? And then maybe, if the time permits, we see how it goes, we could return to some of the remarks that were made in the context of the lecture, because they could shed light on some aspects that could help us in revamping and restructuring and rethinking this educational model. So we start with this big question, why liberal arts and general education? And I'm going to perhaps just go by picking maybe the sequence of interventions, and I'll start again with Professor Grieve.
Well, I didn't prepare a set of remarks here, so I think I'm going to make a series of disconnected remarks, but I hope that my talk indicated why liberal arts, why general education, why core. But I should start by saying that when Robert Hutchins and others in the earlier part of the 20th century were talking about general education, what it meant at that point was courses taken in common. So general education initially meant what we now use as core curriculum, that all our students take Lit Hum, all our students take CC. General education has shifted meanings so that In some places, it means common courses for all students. In other places, it means from a series of courses from which you select a few. And I think that all the terms have gotten somewhat muddled. So when we talk about core curriculum, when we have new faculty come in and we talk about the core curriculum, some of the faculty have come from Harvard that has what they call a core curriculum, but there's no course that all Harvard undergraduates take. They're still selecting. So that would be, for us, a distribution requirement, which is what foreign languages at Columbia and general global core are, that they select from a series. One of you asked me about resistance, that I'd mentioned resistance. And so while this is not necessarily addressing why liberal arts and general education, which I hope my talk did, I think we're in a very fortunate position at Columbia. When I first started there, which was quite a long time ago, faculty would openly criticize the core. And there were the faculty who continued to teach in the core after getting tenure were seen by many as dinosaurs who want to hold on to something old and fossilized and possibly useless in today's world. And that climate has shifted. There may still be people who think that we don't need the core curriculum, but because the administration probably in the mid-1990s to 2000 or so began to take a really firm stand that this is the signature of the Columbia College education and we're not going to run it down publicly. Yes, economics played into that, as I mentioned before. They became aware that the single entity to which most of the alumni dollars came was in support of the core curriculum. So it didn't make a lot of sense to have your deans and president and provost criticizing the core curriculum or criticizing Western texts. So at this point, there may indeed, there's resistance to teaching in the core, but it's really not, you don't hear on campus faculty who don't teach in the core disparaging it. Occasionally, I'm sure, but by and large, there has been a faculty buy-in, whether they teach in it or not, that this is what we do. And that has eased the way for many people. And it has encouraged those faculty who initially saw themselves as above teaching these Western texts, that it was somehow immortalizing texts that needed to be gotten over at this point. We now have more faculty who are teaching in the core who never would have done so before. In terms of incentives, the untenured faculty who come in, who are ladder faculty, who are going to come up for tenure, are almost always, and I'm talking about certain departments, not all departments, but are almost always required to teach Lit-Hum or CC. And the way that it's incentivized is, there are a few things, but one, once they start teaching in the core, they realize how much these texts surprisingly feed back to their own research, no matter what it is they're doing. Two, the opportunity through the weekly meetings, the luncheons, to interact with faculty from different departments, junior colleagues that they make friends with, and senior faculty whose support it would be very nice to have when you come up for tenure, is something that has made a difference for the non-tenured faculty. And third, they are given an extra semester of leave. So after teaching for 3 years, untenured faculty have a semester paid leave. And if you have taught Lit-Hum or CC for 3 years, you get the second semester, so you have a full full year. With the summer, it gives you 15 months off. Before, many departments guarantee that their untenured faculty will teach one graduate course per year. So this is a way of maintaining an active research profile. Most of the time, at least in certain departments, most of the time the untenured faculty graduate classes are very directly tied to their current research project. So that helps as well. I think that's it for incentive. Oh, we now, I mean, if you can throw money at the problem, that's a big help. So starting just this past academic year, this year that's coming to an end, the college, I should say that finances at Columbia are labyrinthine and Byzantine, and we don't really understand a lot of it, but we do know that Columbia College has its own endowments, and alumni dollars go to individual schools, and Columbia College is always the biggest donor, or biggest recipient of donor dollars. And so now, in order to get more senior faculty back into the core, because what we found was that once non-tenured faculty got tenure, many of them didn't return to the core. And then maybe down the road they would. But in order to bring senior faculty back into the core, if you teach Lit-Hum for one semester, or CC, or certain global core courses, if you teach for one semester, you get added compensation of $5,000. If you teach the entire year of Lit-Hum or CC, you get $5,000 extra in the fall, $5,000 extra in the spring, and another $5,000 for having made the commitment to teach a full year. Being on sabbatical, I wasn't able to take advantage of that, but I can't complain about sabbatical. Before that, for the last 10 years or so, before this new innovation, every 6 semesters of Lit-Hum teaching, senior faculty received $7,000 for a summer stipend. And then people decided, administrators decided that it obviously wasn't a sufficient incentive, and so now we've gone to this $5,000 to $15,000 added compensation. I should stop.
I'm glad that it's been reported. Professor Allen?
Oh, okay. I think I can speak without the microphone.
We can't hear you.
Oh, they're recording. Okay. Yeah, fine. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, and it's an honor to be here. I'm from Notre Dame University of Leipzig. It's about a half hour north of here, towards Juni, depending on the traffic. We're a Maronite Catholic university, and as Nedor mentioned, I've been recently appointed the chairholder of Benedict XVI Chair in Religious, Cultural, and Philosophical Studies. And one of the reasons that our president decided to establish that chair was because of this question of liberal education. Of course, as a Catholic institution, we claim to uphold the values of liberal education, that liberal education ought to be the core of the curriculum, but the realities being what they are, that is not the case at our university. So one of the reasons, and it has to do, of course, with money. We're tuition driven. We don't have that luxury of an endowment. We're working on it. And so I have been in dialogue with many of my colleagues about this very question. So again, it's an honor to be here. I guess I would just, in answering the question that you've raised, I would refer to a great text, and not an ancient and medieval one, but a modern one. And I think that's probably the point I want to make. The great texts don't have to be ancient and medieval. The one I have in mind is a text called Truth and Method by Gadamer, where he has a very profound meditation on what is meant by classical texts. And there I think he avoids the two extremes the one extreme that venerates the text, that almost presupposes the text is meant as an elitist, for elitist sort of text. And the other one, which is also an extreme, I think, Gadamer thinks so too, that the classical is simply a phase of historical development, and therefore we should get over it. I think both of those are wrong. I would agree with Gadamer here. The definition of a classical text I would take from Hegel, where he says that which is significant in itself and therefore self-interpretive, self-reflective, which then I think creates the proper balance between is, ontology, and ought, prescription. And if these two aren't in the proper tension, then I think we end up falling into the two extremes that Gadamer mentions. He also, in that very enlightening discussion on what the meaning of the classical is, speaks about the importance of hermeneutics. And he says that, that the hermeneutical task is about deepening the temporal quality of mediating between past and future, but in the present. And I think that is really the key to understanding what is meant by classical. I think it's the argument for a core curriculum. But again, I think it avoids two extremes. Historicism on one hand, that these texts are just a phase of historical development. But it also it avoids the equally perilous extreme, I would say, of relativism. When I think the young lady in the little video you showed said it in a very simple but important way. You know, she said, I started to think about what was right and what was wrong. And I think that's really crucial. So again, it's wonderful to be here. I'm looking forward to, I enjoyed the presentation very, very much. Was a bit surprised, I guess I've been out of the States for too long, that you had such a wonderful curriculum at Columbia. I had known that it was there in the past, but I thought those, you know, that it would have been attacked and dissembled a long time ago. So I was pleasantly surprised to hear what I heard, and I'd like to congratulate you two for your wonderful work and presentation. So thank you.
We now move to Dr. Makdisi, and also perhaps a perspective that would be bringing us to the viewpoint of an economist, particularly on assessing liberal arts education, and also from his experience as former deputy president of AAP. Why is this merits defending, promoting?
Thank you, Nader. Let me start, in fact, by saying I'm very happy, in fact, to note that the core program that you have at Columbia has been going on since I was at Columbia 100 years ago. So I'm very happy, and I wish another 100 years for Columbia to keep that course. You asked me to speak in general terms, Nader, and your first question addressed to us, I think, was why liberal education? Why are we supporters, in fact, of humanities, liberal education, though I am an economist? And then I shall say a few words about that and go on to say where EEB fits in this picture. So, I mean, I shall begin by, in fact, going back to Adam Smith, since I'm an economist by training, who said that, who linked the proper workings of markets, or in today's jargon, efficiency of markets, to moral ethics. He was saying, moral ethics is a distinction between right and what is right and what is wrong. And he says, unless society is guided by the laws of ethics, we should not expect the economic system to work well. And I think this is a very odd statement, was true, is true, and will continue to be true. In other words, ethics and economics and other disciplines as well should not be separated as two distinct spheres of thought and action. While some may argue that pure sciences stand on their own, the uses to which these sciences are put they touch on the domain of ethics. In other words, we are in need of guiding principles for social behavior, which liberal education is assumed to embody: morality, free thinking, tolerance, justice. The extent to which liberal education indeed may succeed in bringing about a fairer and more just society is, of course, another matter. Political economic realities sometimes dictate otherwise. We have opposite results, and in fact here I would like to pose the question: has liberal education succeeded in fostering better citizenship? This I think would apply to the US as well to other countries of the world. My second comment, I have 4 comments. My second comment, as more broadly speaking, education covers all human disciplines, all knowledge, the social and pure sciences, arts, music, philosophy, and the environment. And it has impact on development and the quality of society, all of which are of great concern to us. Education is thus at once a process by which we learn specific professional expertise while benefiting from what the humanities and social sciences teach us. No university, I submit, can call itself, no university graduate, I submit, can call himself or herself educated if his or her professional system training of moral and ethical values, if they are short of moral values, no matter how these values may differ from one country to another. The role of education is therefore crucial in determining the quality of society, in embodying, as I already noted, the principles of freedom, justice, and responsible individual and social behavior. Which brings me to my third comment on the role of AUB, past and present. I think we agree that the test of the success of any education institution is directly linked to its ability to graduate well-trained students in their respective professions while instilling in them the principles of ethics, justice, freedom, and responsible social behavior. And I assume this is what both Columbia and the AUB is trying to do in their own respective core courses. I cannot give a definitive assessment of what impact AUB's liberal education has had on Lebanon and on the wider Arab region. But I think it has had its positive influences, especially in the era when national universities had yet to be established in a number of the Arab countries, and AUB was a magnet for students in the region. I think there was a time when AUB has had its influences, and the question arises, are we going to continue to have this profound influence? The point here I would like to emphasize is that AUB has had and continues to have a regional, what in economics we call comparative advantage in the area of liberal education. This advantage stems from the fact that in addition to its historic mission in this regard, the university is located in an environment that permits the flourishing of liberal education. In contrast with the prevailing political environment in the region that directly or indirectly places restrictions, of course that vary one case to another, on the flourishing of the humanities, social sciences, and the arts. AUB has and will continue to have high-level professional schools, but so can other countries in the region. They can establish excellent medical schools, excellent engineering schools, excellent public health schools, excellent agriculture schools, excellent business schools. But given the political environment that has been prevailing, and for now continues to prevail in the Arab world, AUB's regional comparative advantage lies in the humanities, which brings me to my fourth comment. Therefore, it seems logical to me that AUB continue to give the humanities all the support that its core mission demands. We need to graduate not only well-trained doctors and engineers and other professionals, but equally importantly, educated professionals. Otherwise, AUB, I submit, will be failing its contribution to society's broad development. Finally, of course, good education requires the corresponding good budgetary support. A budget that allows for combining high-level professional education with a strong liberal arts tradition. But this, I submit, unless you want to discuss it, is a matter that lies outside the deliberations of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ribita, also from your perspective as the former dean of arts and science.
Thank you. I will try to separate and focus the discussion on what we call at AUB the Civilization Studies program as compared with the general humanities and social sciences requirements that seem, in my view, as I listened to the speaker, to cover what is called the core curriculum at Columbia. Indeed, our students from all faculties take courses in arts and sciences, in the humanities and social sciences. But I understand that all of them are required to take at least part of, if not all, the requirements of the Civilization Studies program, which consists, I think, of 4 courses.
2 courses.
Too bad. My own experience with these courses started in 1960 when I was a sophomore here. And I took these courses and they were called then general education. In fact, I still think that the best description of these courses is precisely general education. Because there is nowhere in our educational curriculum, whether at high school, college, or anywhere else, does one get this very well organized overview of human progress, starting with Gilgamesh all the way to now. So if there is any justification for this, it's precisely this, that it gives the student the possibility of having this well-organized general overview over the course of, let's say, 2 semesters or 3 or 4. My take on the contents of these courses is that they have always concentrated, and as the discussion seems to be pointing out too also, on just the humanities and the social sciences, and I've always said that it should also cover human progress in the sciences. It is not appropriate, I think, for a student to graduate without knowing not the sciences as such, but the major conceptual changes that have occurred over the years. We cannot just think of, let's say, physics and remain in the Newtonian, Descartesian world. We have to also understand that things have changed, and already quantum mechanics, relativity have been around for 100 years. And although one may not learn how to understand what these things are, but should recognize that they have changed conceptually man's view of the world and the universe around us. So it's not only important to learn about black holes, but to know what this thing is all about. So what I am calling for is that this general education, this general overview, not only should be maintained, but in some sense should be expanded a little bit in terms of the general science courses that actually are at Columbia, but there they have to take 3 courses. Well, all I'm saying here is that they should be incorporated within the Civilization Studies program. Now, one other item I believe is important, which I'm not sure if it has ever been included is a simple coverage over the history of science in this part of the world. That most of our students are told that somehow science flourished in the Middle East, but I don't think anyone who graduates from AUB or graduated from AUB knows to what extent that did happen, or what happened. They just hear of this myth and somehow sing its praises without knowing anything about it. And this is absent in our civilization sequence or studies program at the moment. And I hope that this also somehow be included, because you cannot just talk about others. We have to talk about what happened also in this part of the world as well. And in any case, any program such as this cannot function properly without the students. At Columbia, we heard the appreciation of these students. But I can tell you, starting with me as a student, and what I perceive is still the problem with our students, and I'll explain why. Many of our students don't like to have to go through these courses. They don't like it because they are very focused on coming to study economics or business or engineering and such. So what I would suggest is that when the students come, and they are, as you know, also students that do not come from a high school background which encourages discussion, but rather encourages reproduction of material they hear from their teachers, whether it's through the baccalaureate program or something else like this. Is that some orientation at the beginning be made to impart upon these students actually the relevance and the importance of this core course that we seem as faculty to force on them. When I took these courses, which is now many, many, many years ago, I hated them. However, I learned later to recognize their importance, and in fact the only books that I have read during that year that I remember are the books that was forced on me during the general education courses. So when I came back to serve as dean, this is the one program that I wanted to make sure stays, and the one program that should be strengthened and enlarged and somehow be as supported as possible. Another problem that we face is with the faculty who teach these courses. You can meet a very good teacher and enjoy the course, enjoy the discussions, but you can also meet very bad teachers who make it as boring as hell to be in any one of those hours of discussion. So again, there should be some orientation to the faculty who teach, and the teaching should be made collaborative as much as possible, because as was mentioned in your lecture, there is no one who knows everything that happened in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. So we have to have people who come in within the same section, within the same course, to actually give off of what they know best and engage students as much as possible. And I mean engage the students and encourage them to engage themselves, because sometimes this does not happen. And as I mentioned earlier, many of our students are not naturally used to this. In high schools, nobody asks them to discuss. They ask them to reproduce material, and that's about it. In terms of management, when you have large numbers of students coming into the university, and you want the classes to be of the size of 22, 20, which is what we, I hope, still insist on doing, then of course it presents a matter of how you can manage to give 2, 3, 4 courses as a core to everybody, and have the right number of faculty and so on. This is a problem, has been a problem, and we try as best as possible to do it by having faculty from various departments actually involve themselves in teaching this core curriculum. And I hope this will increase to include, as I said again, many faculty from other faculties, not just arts and sciences, who can contribute within their field of expertise when a section is, or a discussion section is taught collaboratively. So everybody in the university should actually be asked to participate in this. There are many other issues that one can raise. and I believe the university should take this course seriously, support it, and encourage not only students but also faculty to participate in it as best as they can. I'm sorry, I sound like an administrator in what I've said. I did not emphasize the high values of ethics and all that you learn. I know others will talk about this, but I wanted to mention that the program is an excellent program. It is not appreciated by students. If you convince yourselves that the students come to your classes happy, I assure you they are not. They seem to feel they are forced to take this. This is a feeling we have to remove by making the courses relevant to them and by making the courses much more interesting to them rather than appear to them as something that is forced. I can talk a little bit more about it later, but I don't want to take too much time, so thank you for the previous discussion.
Just to add more to how this will be managed, just a little bit from your perspective on the issue of co-teaching. And here going into the details of how we apportion loads of teaching as a dean, because this has become a difficult issue for us, interdepartmental and interfaculty.
Well, we had several, other than this program, we've had the courses taught by various faculty, and of course faculty always want to be compensated for what they do. But by compensation, I don't mean necessarily monetary compensation. In fact, I am against any monetary compensation for any duty any faculty does in the university while they are full-time faculty members at this university. That's the given. So being chairman, being this, being that, it becomes kind of cheap, you know. You do this, we'll pay you. I disagree with this. I think faculty should be given a good salary so that they can live comfortably, and then they should give all of themselves to this university, whatever they do. That's one. However, you can compensate in terms of teaching credit. For example, in the courses that are offered in the Center for Arab and Middle East Studies, we have courses that are given by political scientists, by economists, and various others. And so we would kind of keep track, we used to keep track of how many hours they have taught. And then cumulatively at the end, when they add up to a course, we give them a course release or something like this. So we do account for teaching duties, and this can be done here as well. But this requires a simple accounting process which keeps track of that, if people want to be accountant. I mean, if you ask a faculty member to give a lecture to the Civilization sequence program on some general topic of their own expertise, I don't think that faculty member should be compensated for it. It should be an honor for the faculty to have been asked to do this, because he's facing many students across faculties and so on, and that's what they are here for. So this issue of compensation, unless it becomes a repeated teaching duty, should be made much more voluntary and much more as part of your participation in this university as you know. If you want to be accounted for every hour you speak, for every word you utter, then maybe being a professor in university is not exactly your call.
We pass now to Dr. Al-Har, and perhaps if you could focus a bit more on GE and how it developed to the point of being somehow a parallel core curriculum, less structured to what we offer in CS. And are there scopes for perhaps coalescing our resources, developing a core curriculum that combines both programs? Just by way of brainstorming on the distinction between these two.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bassi. But let me first read how AAC&U, Association of American Colleges and Universities, and how they define liberal education, how they define general education and how they identify the changing nature of liberal education from the past century to the 21st century. I think it's important to know.
Can you speak to the mic?
It's important to understand how we were and where we are now. AAC and they define liberal education as an approach to learning that empowers individuals and prepare them to deal with complexity, diversity, and change. It provides a student with a broad knowledge of the wider world, science, not only humanities, science, culture, and society, as well as an in-depth study of a specific area of interest in their majors. A liberal education helps students develop a sense of social responsibility as well as a strong and transferable intellectual and practical skills such as communication, analytical and problem-solving skills, and a demonstrated ability to apply knowledge and skills in real-world settings. Okay. The general education is the part of liberal education curriculum that is shared by all students. These are the courses common to all students in a university. It provides broad exposure to multiple disciplines and forms the basis for developing essential intellectual, civic, and practical capacities. General education can take many forms and increasingly includes introductory, advanced, and integrative forms of learning. Well, the way how liberal education changed from past century to this century, it has always been, and for intellectual and personal development. However, in the past century, it was an option. Nowadays, it's becoming a necessity to all students. It was viewed as non-vocational. Nowadays, it's essential for success in a global economy and for informed citizenship. And maybe the way how to get the student more interested in general education and liberal education is to talk in their first semester about the economic case of liberal education and the civic case of liberal education. Again, there are a lot of literature about these two things. So this will attract their interest, and in courses like Introduction to Engineering, which is offered to all engineering students in their first semesters, as well as some introductory courses in different faculties, this can be highlighted to attract their interest. How this can be done? In the past century, this was done through studies in arts and sciences disciplines and through general education in the initial years of college. In this century, it's different. It's through studies that emphasize the essential learning outcomes. Essential learning outcomes, I will read the essential learning outcomes, how defined by AAC and you, across the entire educational continuum from school through college at progressively higher level of achievements. In the past century, the location of liberal education was in liberal arts colleges or colleges of arts and sciences in larger institutions. Nowadays, it's in all schools, universities, community colleges, as well as across all fields of studies. The essential skills recommended for liberal education, they range from knowledge of human cultures and the physical and natural world, through study in the sciences, mathematics, social sciences, and humanities, histories, languages, and the arts, intellectual and practical skills, including inquiry and analysis, critical and creative thinking, written and oral communication, quantitative thinking, information literacy, teamwork, and problem solving. And I think that it's missing information technology. Some minimum knowledge of IT, personal and social responsibility, including civic knowledge and engagement, local and global, intercultural knowledge and competence, foundation and skills for lifelong learning, and what Dr. Makdisi has emphasized on, and I strongly agree, ethical reasoning and action. And by the way, this is so important. Assessment of general education program that was done the past year has identified some weaknesses on ethics, ethics, reasoning, and action in both. And some research was done on how to improve ethics with our students. The conclusion was not only to teach ethics in classroom, to engage students in ethics activities. And this is why many universities in the US and in Europe, they have established ethics center that facilitates to students to be engaged in ethical activities, sometimes by collaborating with the Civic Engagement Center. Concerning the experience at AOB with general education, in the early 2000s, general education, which is, I repeat, it's the common courses taken by all students, it consisted of a list of courses that are classified as general education, but there was no process at that time that tells what is a general, what is a humanities, what is a social science. Only faculty members used to submit a course and to take their own decision where to classify the course. For example, I can give some example. An introductory course in French language was classified at that time as a humanity, which is wrong. The same for some courses, like I remember some anthropology of the body. It was confusing to students whether this is a social science or whether this is a humanity, and faculty members, advisors used to call the registrar asking, what is this course? I remember, I think 2005, a committee was formed and they have prepared a strategic plan for general education. And in this strategic plan, the areas were identified, how many credits in each area was set, some additional requirements were added, such as to have courses, writing intensive courses, research component in courses, etc. And the problem was solved by the General Education Committee in 2010, when a set of learning outcomes that defines exactly what is a humanities, what is a social science, what is a natural science in the form of learning outcomes, and a process was defined by which a course is submitted, is matched to the learning outcomes, and a decision is taken where to classify a course. And in 2010, we ended up with a list of courses classified based on learning outcomes. But in fact, this was just the beginning, because the classification was done only based on filling a survey by the instructor. And there was no double check on the quality. In 2011 or 2012, a new governance, which is based on assessment, was proposed and approved by the Senate. A general education board was formed, and a recertification process was introduced. Through this recertification process, courses classified as general education were evaluated based on evidence, not only based on perception by the instructor, based on evidence, and there was a peer review by members of the General Education Board. Some courses were stopped, some courses were not, well, some courses were revised, And this has helped to improve the quality of these courses. And now we have a list of general education courses which are evaluated by peers, and this process was examined by reviewers from Middle State Commission on Higher Education, and they have reported that AUB has a model general education program. But still, there are many improvements that must be done. For example, one of the improvements, we still have courses which are not taught in the right place. There are quantitative thinking courses which are not taught in the math department or in the computer science department. They are taught in other locations. We have humanities courses which are taught in professional schools, like engineering ethics, like business ethics. They are classified as humanities. Well, maybe some, as a first step toward this improvement, we are asking now a portfolio of these courses per semester, and we are evaluating this portfolio to make sure that, there is still some more to be done. Regarding the CVSP courses are still being taken by a majority of university students. This is something I know because of assessment. When going to the assessment of the general education program, it's not like assessment in the major. In the major, you have a limited number of courses. You know which courses to select for assessment. But for general education courses, we had to go by approximation. By approximation, the idea was to identify courses taken by at least 2/3 by AUB students. In the humanities, we had CVSP 201, CVSP 202, and Philosophy 210. These three courses were used for assessment. So this shows that still CVSP courses are popular, in spite of the fact that they are no longer mandatory in engineering, in business, in school, I think School of Nursing, but they are still very popular. Well, if you have any addition.
I think this will become a central aspect of the discussion. And I hope that when we open it for discussion, that we focus particularly on why in the beginnings of the 2000 onwards, there was a direction towards introducing GE in parallel with CS, rather than revamping CS in such a way that it integrates elements that pertain to science or ethics offerings, and rather than having a unit that is trying to replace CS in terms of the mission that it has offered to the university 70 years before GE. And in parallel with it, that's just a broad question to be raised. And now we are sensing as if there is a third partner entering on the scene in the university, which is a center for ethics. Why would they be three rather than, why Trinity rather than one? But we could discuss it.
It's a mystery.
Yes. And this is directed also, particularly, I would like the comments of Dr. Vitar on this, besides Dr. Hash, because it was also the deanship, the way we're able to the board of deans. But this is something that we could discuss after we have the intervention from Dr. Hash.
Thank you. It's always very weird to speak as the last of 6 speakers, so probably you heard already part of what I'm going to say. I'm going to speak from my own perspective as a former participant or faculty member in the CVSP program, or today Civilization Studies program. So I think this was, and I think still needs to be, the heart of the humanities at AUB, and at the heart of the liberal arts education at AUB. for several reasons. Some of them were already mentioned by Dean Bitar. And it is the quality of the teaching, of the education that our students receive in schools. They are not used to think, they are not used to read, they are used to memorize everything that their teachers are giving them. They come to AUB not wanting to read, not wanting to think, wanting a grade, and wanting also to have the least work to do. This is why CS appears to them as really difficult, because they have to read. And they have to read texts which are not easy. But they have, in a class of 20 or 25, when I used to teach CS, if you ask the students when you start, in CS 201, how many have heard the name of Homer? And you'd be surprised to have 2 or 3 raise their fingers, and they were not quite sure. They heard about him, but they were not quite sure who he was. The Iliad, the Odyssey, all these texts that are so familiar to, or at least we think are familiar to all of them, were not even, have not been even heard by the students. So this is why I believe that this is an essential part of all university student education. And this liberal arts education is really what made AUB unique, among all the institution of higher learning that we have not only in Lebanon but in the region. The fact that this aspect, of general education has been neglected, or the humanities in general have been neglected, has to do with the also prevailing mentality that professional schools are much better. They provide you, they allow you to get a decent job. Even in schools, all those who go in the mathematics, sections or science sections are the excellent students, whereas the least excellent students are those who go to the philosophy department or to the literary department. And those who are accepted at AUB follow the same pattern. The brilliant ones go to engineering or medical school, and the other ones, go to archaeology or history. They require lesser, so to level, if you want to give these students a minimum or an average general education, I think the CS program is essential. And the other thing, and what differs, what is different, what makes CS different from general education requirements is that in CS the perspective and the aim are different from the courses taken as general education requirements in humanities. I teach such, courses as, archaeology courses or history courses, but they are not the same as the courses we teach in CS. Because in CS we are not looking at these books from the point of view of the specialist. We are not teaching Thucydides as historians. We are teaching Thucydides as part of our, of the development of human minds and reactions towards event, how they think, how they thought, how we have to think about them, how to, raise such questions today in times of war, in times of peace, and so on, what happens to men during times of war, and this is something we experience every day, in our region in particular. So the perspective of CS is different. We read literature, we read history, we read philosophy, we read novels, we read everything. And the perspective is the same, we discuss them. We discuss this is the development of human thinking. And it's different than a student taking an archaeology course. Because in an archaeology course, of course, you give him primary sources, you give him, you give the students information that comes from primary sources, you discuss with them, but in fact, you are giving them something that is specific to this discipline, and not something that is broader, at the level of human thinking, if I may say so. So I think 2 things have weakened the CS program, in my opinion, and I regret them, strongly. First of all, the CS program was fueled by faculty members from all departments. Yani there was hardly any full-time CS teacher or CS professor. They were the main contributors were the history department, the English department, the philosophy department, and of course we had sometimes also professors from other departments. But this is what made CS a great place to be. The second thing that, the second step that has weakened the CS program, and I think, I would have liked it to continue being the core program for the humanities, and this is the implementation of the general education requirement, mainly for the humanities, which stopped requiring from students to take CS courses as part of their humanities requirement. And I think this has not improved the quality of our students, intellectual development, let's say. So I think that I enjoyed teaching CS. I taught it for 13 years. I never got a semester free, and I never got $15,000 for every year. 13 years without one single free semester. But I enjoyed it because not only the students are confronted with things that challenge all their beliefs. We are in a society where students know something and think that this is the only thing that is the right thing. When you challenge them with other students and other, opinions, other thoughts, they are shaken. I believe me, some of them are really shaken if they perceive these things as, how can this be? They start sometimes laughing at mythology. He kills her, he loves her, and they are gods. Said, wait. All this, is the beginning. You will know the development, and it is also so instructive for the professor. I mean, I learned so much from my CS classes. I enjoyed them more than I enjoyed sometimes my archaeology classes, because I had a wide range of students from different departments with different minds, with different ways of thinking, and they were all, sometimes clashing, sometimes, the ones, most of the time, they are the same people who continue to speak, and the others, are too shy to express their opinions, or they have a threat, basically, so they cannot discuss. But what I want to say is that no Faculty of Arts and Sciences without, no liberal arts education without a core program in the humanities, such as what in Colombia they call, the CC, or here we call it the Civilisation sequence. I think it is absolutely necessary to complete the professional education that our students receive in schools. They receive a magnificent education in math and sciences, but they cannot read, they cannot write, and they cannot think on their own. So this is the place where they learn it, and I hope we will improve it, keep it, and development, and not shrink it anymore.
Thank you very much.
Yes, another issue. I just want to clarify two things. One, there are two issues. I mean, we always agree that there's importance, the importance of liberal education at AUB and elsewhere, right? My first question is to you. There is nobody here from the administration. I'm not seeing anybody from the present administration. You have no formal administration.
We have two.
Who have left?
Yeah,
who have left. So the question is, in light of what Helen said, is liberal education at AUB under threat, or does the present administration plan to strengthen the component of CS? Because in the past it has been, some courses have been withdrawn. There were 4, becoming 2, and so on. I think this is the first question that we would like to perhaps discuss. The second comes to, well, how do you design this to make it more attractive at the level of students, at the level of who is teaching, and how do you make it, these things that have been, that Khalil and Hanan have talked about, why it is, students don't like that CS. So, I mean, can we separate these two issues so that we know exactly where we stand?
just want to express the fact that the saddest news I heard today, which I did not know, was that the requirement of 4 courses has been reduced to 2, and that engineers are not now forced to take these things. And business as well. Because this actually is detrimental to liberal arts education, I think. Commenting on what Dr. Ali said earlier about the classification of courses. Traditionally, courses here at the AUB were classified according to the department that was actually offering them. And we did not have too many, let's say, interdisciplinary type courses. So, for example, a course in sociology was, well, in the social sciences. It was later on that when some courses were being offered across departments, that questions were raised as to how do you classify it, not for any educational reason as much as for a bureaucratic reason in terms of accounting how many credits the student has covered in this or that to satisfy graduation requirement. This is what motivated trying to define whether a course is humanities or social sciences, not the educational value as much as how do you account it for students. And this is later, I think, what led to the general education program, which, I repeat again, sadly has reduced the effect of civilization sequence or civilization studies program, which I hope will be reversed. So whether administrators are here or not, in my view, it is the faculty who do things, and it is up to the faculty now to reinstate what was a core program and is an important program at AUB and should not be allowed to be diminished, full stop. So there are faculty members here, previous administrators, current administrators, and the message should come out from this discussion that what has been done is wrong and should be reversed, like many other things that have been done and should be reversed, but this is another discussion.
Well, just a clarification about classification of the courses is not done for the purpose of counting. Classification is done by matching the course content to the learning outcomes upon request from a faculty member. I can give an example. Read a course, may like anthropology courses. Well, they may have a social science component that exceeds the humanities component or vice versa. It depends how the instructor is willing to offer this course. So what happens, we receive a detailed description and sometimes with evidence portfolio, and classification is done based on this component. But definitely never a course coming from English department or from philosophy was classified other than the humanities or communication. I have another clarification concerning the CVSP courses. I joined AUB in 1987, and CVSP courses at engineering were not mandatory. There were a choice. So this decision was taken before 1987, before I joined AUB.
May I just want to make a comment. I'm not questioning the value of classification. It's good that you classify them. But the question is, why do you classify a course, whether it's humanities or social science? In the final analysis, it's because the registrar has to decide how many credits has been taken by a student in this or that, so that a degree is offered or not. What I'm saying is that the motivation, the reason why you needed to classify is for basically a bureaucratic reason. Whether the course is humanities or social sciences, if we did not have specific requirements in numbers of credits, it doesn't matter. You just take the course, enjoy it, learn from it, and that's the end of it. But keep classifying because it helps the registrar. This is what I'm saying. The motivation started when interdepartmental courses between, let's say, a social sciences department and the humanities department started to be given, and there the confusion started. So there was a need for this classification, as you just mentioned in anthropology, for example. Or when engineering offers a course in ethics, philosophy department offers courses in ethics as well. In philosophy, there was no question. This is humanities. But in engineering, well, it becomes questionable. But the final result is bureaucracy.
May I ask Dr. Grieve 2 questions? She's on the panel, right? Dr. Grieve, I had asked you to what extent you think that the liberal education in the US has had a positive impact on society. Secondly, would you say that the civilization sequence that you offer at Columbia has been a success? Because here we're debating why is it that the CS seems to be under threat, and neither you have not answered my question. I think you should answer, because Khalid said very frankly that, if so, there must be a counter-revolution at the level of the faculty and the faculty administration to reverse that trend. So, there are 2 questions that I've got from Dr. Grieve, and I think you should answer them.
So as to impact, yes, I do think that the core curriculum, general education, has had an impact, that liberal arts colleges have had a positive influence. The political leaders that we've had have come from great liberal arts institutions. The youngest head of the NAACP was a Columbia College graduate, Ben Jealous, his name was. And so when you look at the backgrounds of some of our most important thinkers and activists, they had this kind of education. So I think I think it can't necessarily be measured, but I think it has had a positive influence. My daughter graduated from Princeton in 2010, and she was lamenting the other day that one of the GOP candidates for president, who now has dropped out of the race, Ted Cruz, graduated from Princeton, and she said, "This is a terrible thing for Princeton." So she's very glad he's dropped out of the race as of yesterday, or 2 days ago, Tuesday. So when I think of, so the reason I mentioned Ted Cruz is that if we didn't have Donald Trump running for president, we would be horrified at the things that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz were saying. But we have somebody who's even so much more horrifying that it kind of diminished the rigid, intolerant things that a person such as Ted Cruz was saying. So what I'm wondering is, when you have people whose views seem so intolerant, and they're a product of this, can you then say that this had a positive influence? And I guess it comes down to numbers. I think it's had more of a positive influence than it has produced intolerant Ted Cruz's. Again, I can't measure it, but it's what I think. The second question was, your second question?
Success as such?
Yes, the core curriculum, has the program been a success? Absolutely, absolutely. I think that when we talk to alumni, the video you saw, they were all graduating seniors, and so there was a certain nostalgia already there, but they were reflecting on the core curriculum as a big part of their college experience. And they all were very positive about it. That may be that of the invitation I put out, the ones who felt positively about it were the ones who came to be filmed. So it certainly is the case that among the current student body, you will get students who question why they have to take this, or they'll say, because I come in contact with a lot of students that I'm not necessarily teaching, and I'll ask them about their core experience. And the statements are quite mixed. But the farther away they get from graduation, the more fondly they remember the core curriculum. And so I do think that the program has been and continues to to be a success. My colleague here brought up bad teachers, and that's something that I didn't address at all. It is in fact the case that you get a mixed bag in terms of teaching. We vet the graduate students vigorously. Any faculty member who wants to teach in the core gets to do it. And one of my colleagues routinely reduced students to tears. And when a freshman came in and I was chairing Lit Hum, and there was a petition process, which we've done away with, to change sections. If you didn't want to be in the section you were in. And so this student came in, and he said, I don't want a graduate student, I want a real professor. So I looked at one of my colleagues and I said, oh, I'll give you a real professor. You want a real professor?
Rather than nominal.
Yes, and so, and it is also the case that now faculty members might teach a full year, but they might just teach one of the semesters. And so if I only teach one semester, it's routinely the spring. And so I'll ask the students what their fall experience was like, not to critique the faculty, but to find out what some of the overarching themes were, and the kinds of things they discussed. And from time to time, the students will say, well, we actually didn't have much discussion. She or he lectured the whole time. And so this is not in the spirit of the course and or courses. And what we can hope is that at least in some part of the core experience, they had sections in which discussion reigned as opposed to being lectured to. And I also think that you hear a lot from students and alumni of the things they wouldn't have done if it hadn't been required. That they know about art, they know how to read a painting that they wouldn't have known before. They understand something about music that they hadn't known before. And unlike Frontiers of Science, which has this peculiar tension of the scientists versus the non-scientists, we don't get that in the other courses. We don't get musicians resenting having to take music humanities, or young sculptors resenting having to take art humanities. So I'm not quite sure why there is that issue, but yes, I think it has indeed been a success.
Speaking of presidential candidates, does Wednesday have a core program? Because she is most likely to become the next president, as I understand it. And we want to know whether.
I will look into Wellesley. The former dean of Columbia College, Michelle Moody Adams, was a graduate of Wellesley, but I don't know whether they have a core curriculum.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to open it up. Dr. has, for some reason, this one has gone out. It's not working.
Thank you all for this interesting panel. I think at last we touched on the reality principle and the difficulties of it and so on. And I think we should learn from each other. And I want to address Professor Bitar when he said, I think correctly, that students feel they are forced to take this course, CS and so on. And he's right, because even if you give them a course that's called play, as long as it's forced, they're going to resist it. Anything that's forced on students, they're going to resist it. But I was wondering of what we did, for example, at AUC, at the American University in Cairo, where every student has to take a course in philosophy called Philosophy 220. And they have subtitles. I wonder if you have them with some subtitles so that the students would feel, at least within what they are forced to take, they have some kind of...
That's one.
That's for me.
I thought it doesn't work anymore. I wanted to ask also Dr. Green. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. What we didn't touch on is how do you evaluate the students? How do you grade them, okay? Now when I first started joining the core curriculum at AUC, at the American University in Cairo, we used to give them Thank you.
It was a year program with 6 credits, so that in the end they had 12 credit hours, and it was pass or fail. And frankly, I like that, but now we don't. We grade them, and when we grade them, as I think Dr. Helen would agree, Helen Sellers would agree, is that they come and they bargain about it, and why did I get this, and why did I get that, and so on. So I'd like to know, what we can do so that they are not so much involved in the idea of grading, but more in the idea of learning. And if you would consider, you just give them pass or fail.
Well, I think you touch on something very interesting, the tension between what the grade is and the amount of work they do in a course and the learning that's involved. And I think that the grading and the concern about grades is unfortunate, but it is a reality in terms of particularly the students who are pre-med, pre-law, and they can't, when they say I can't afford to get a B, it's a real problem for them, for their future. So one thing that Columbia did quite a number of years ago is along on the transcripts, along with the grade that the student got, the most frequently given grade in that class is also recorded in parentheses. So if you had someone who gave everybody an A, you would see that the student got an A, but then you would see that almost everybody got an A. So that was a way of making our transcripts more truthful, I think. That this student wasn't, not that we wanted to disparage the student or undermine the student, but that the student wasn't so much above the others that all the others got A as well. How we grade in Lit Hum, so the first year course, is you're given a guideline that there should be a participation grade, there should be a writing grade, and there is a common final exam that all the sections take, and we're talking about somewhere between 65 and 72 sections of Lit Hum each semester, which is big staff to handle. And the instructors have a great deal of anxiety about the common exam, which I think is utterly ridiculous because you grade your own students. So if you feel that the exam that's been designed by a certain set of instructors really doesn't cover what you taught or issues that you brought up in the class, then you adjust your grading accordingly. So I really think the anxiety over a common final is unfounded. I don't think it should be pass-fail because the, again, unfortunate reality has to do with the pressures on the students and time management. And if passing is a minimal amount of work, then that's what you're going to get from a lot of the students, and I don't think that serves anybody. I think I have long been a proponent, and it's not, so far has had no impact, at Columbia, of reducing the number of courses that students can take in a semester. When Columbia was not as selective as it is now, one of the ways to attract students was to announce that you could double major and triple major in things, which I call credit hoarding or credential hoarding. And so you have students doing that, whereas Princeton, for example, you can have one major and then you can have one certificate, which is like a minor. But at Columbia, you have double and triple majors, which means they're cramming a tremendous number of courses in every semester. So if you factor into that there's a course which is pass-fail, and it's a core course, then you're going to get minimal work, and I don't think that's a useful outcome. In an ideal world, and in some schools, there aren't grades per se, but individual evaluations written by each of the instructors for all the students in their course, and I'm trying to think which schools do that, but it might be St. John's, which is based on significant text. In an ideal world, you would take the pressure off the students and everybody would simply learn for the love of learning, but you know, we have a lot of realities that we face, or that they face.
We're running short on time. We'll just take one question and comment. But the aspects that relate to AUB and the local scene, which were addressed in part in terms of this roundtable, are going to be central to the discussion of panel 3. So I hope you'll be still with us, because we could go over more details. I'm terribly sorry, Richard. Peter was first.
Well, actually, what you've just said...
Peter, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry.
I think I was asked a question earlier.
Yes, about the subtitles.
Subtitles.
Yeah. Well, when the 4 courses were required, the 2 new courses were designed to be a kind of briefer coverage of the 4, and then thematic courses were introduced by various faculty to allow students to make choices. By thematic, I mean a faculty member would cover a specific topic across longer periods and things like this, instead of going through, let's say, the 5 centuries and cover everything. You take a topic and cover it through, let's say, 5 centuries. I mean, that's the difference between the 2. So many thematic such courses were created, and students then had the choice of either taking the 4 or taking the 2 that are a briefer form and the other thematic courses. This is at the time I was serving as dean. However, whatever happened now, since then, I don't know. I mean, as I said, today was the first time I hear that many such requirements were removed in the professional schools, and in arts and sciences, I don't know what the requirements are at the moment. But I am sad that this has happened, and I call for a revolution.
Well, what has happened actually is that I think the problem had different facets. At one point it was really, particularly I think, monetary. Basically the other departments were complaining, they had more, in some cases they had more professors than students. And this was one of the driving forces that I would hear from people actually at the time, because I was director of the program. So, you know, that was one item which may continue to face us when we do try to have this revolution. That one of the reasons why reducing it from 4 to 2 was to give, you know, to force you to let students take other courses. I was even given a doomsday thing that, oh, nobody's going to take your courses anymore, which is ridiculous because it didn't happen. We're turning away students all the time because we want to keep it down to 20, 22, 25 maximum. We're turning away many, many students all the time. So that didn't happen. But what did happen was that because we lost the kind of identity of it as a 4-course program, fueled by, as Helen mentioned, we had the chairs of the departments all took part in deciding what was happening. And then most of the faculty came from departments. We had only 2 or 3 full-timers. That was meant to be the model when you were the dean, when I was director. And so I was forced as director to accept, and the program at the time was forced to accept the compromise, which then had an effect on everything. It had an effect on the faculty and the interest of the faculty teaching. And then it had, we lost the unity of the faculty at the time. We used to debate. We only had 4 courses. Every single Monday we either were together discussing 201, 203, the next 202. No, sorry, we actually, in fact, we only did, you know, the fall we would do 201, 203. In the spring we would do 202, 204. The faculty teaching it were all there every other Monday. And this created a community of the faculty. It kept the faculty interested. Somebody coming in, maybe not wanting to teach, would actually get very interested because he was in touch in that way. So we lost a lot of things because of the way things progressed. Now the war, of course, had a lot to do with it. When the war happened, we lost a lot of people who were holding that thing up, and then we had to just start to take people who happened to be around. We lost it. So I'm saying this because this is really I think the challenge here for AUB. What any revolution has to happen has to move back onto those basic ideas: a community of faculty, a community of students, and a community of the whole university taking the same courses at the same time. 201, 202 were meant to be taken as sophomores, 203, 204 juniors and seniors. But when people were doing it in that way, you see, now what we have done is we've spread it out. We have a lot of courses, but I don't think we're really serving the whole purpose of this kind of a program. So anyway, we are now, everybody in the program is now thinking about how we can progress. But I think that was a very important issue. I think the other issue that's very interesting that I'd like people to be thinking about all the time is this really, and we are going to do it in the third panel, but we are dealing with people who come from high schools totally unprepared, and they don't come in as freshmen, they come in as sophomores. And so Patricia, if you're not aware of that, so you get them at the freshman level. So when they come into the pro, we have to do all of that, and we therefore have to absolutely keep that in mind. That in getting our teaching faculty together, in some way we have to help each other to do the basic job of this kind of a program, is deal with those who are not going to be going into getting BAs in the humanities, but people who maybe will have nothing else but that, and so you have to kind of get a kind of a way of teaching where you're giving sufficient care for the brilliant ones who are going to get it anyway, but you really have to kind of make sure that you're hitting that level of people who are coming out of Plato's cave. And that's a big challenge I don't think you have in places where you have freshmen or you have people who have good high schools. So we'll have to talk about that in the third panel, of course, but I think it's an important part of the discussion.
I guess we've come now to the end of the session, but in case you have any further comments,
we'll send it in writing.
In writing, that's good, with signatures. This way we can initiate the conversation with the administration. Thank you very much for joining us.